In a second, we're just trying to push the people in. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have another 1 minute approximately to wait to get the long queue of people who are registering. So the arrival time between 8:30 and 9 clearly didn't work because everybody thinks it's 10 to 9. So we're a bit delayed, like the transition, but we will just wait another 15 seconds and then we'll get going. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2025 edition of the CEE Sustainable Finance Summit. I'm Linda Zeilina-Cross, the CEO of ISFC, or the International Sustainable Finance Center, an independent think tank that's behind the event.
And my name is Julian Toth. I'm the COO of ISFC and also Director of Czech Sustainable Investment Forum. And we are delighted to have you here and host you again at this event. Some of you have been before, and I see many of you. You may know, maybe remember that this is actually the 4th edition and the 4th year of the CEE Sustainable Finance Summit, but also it's actually a pretty big milestone because it's the 5th year of ISFC as the organization. Yeah, no. And so, as I said, so it is an important milestone. Normally at this milestone, one would be tempted to take opportunity to reflect back on how things have been going and so forth. Let's not do that. Let's actually not focus on what has been happening and so on. Let's focus on the future, right? What the future economy is going to look like, what the energy or economy mix is going to look like, how are we going to modernize. So what exactly will it look like in 10, 20 years? Now, this summit serves to provide some answers to these questions, but also this is an opportunity for me to demonstrate that we actually want to do what we always do in this summit. We want to have a conversation with you. You may have noticed that some of the panel discussions are actually called Conversation with the Audience. This is an impact and expertise-led event. Most of us, and if not all, are practitioners, so let's actually have a conversation. And even now, already to demonstrate that, in the beginning would be interesting to hear from you, at least by show of hands. And when talking about future of the economy, I'm actually very curious to hear how many of you, by show of hands, do you think that the energy mix and in the CEE region will be by vast majority renewable or low carbon power and energy? How many do you think is going to be renewable power in 20 years? 20 years, very important. Okay, good. Maybe one more, because energy, I feel like, is it easier? I don't know. Bit more sensitive question, especially here in Czechia or maybe Slovakia. How many of you think that in 20 years, nearly all of us, if not all of us, are going to be driving to the CEE Summit in an electric vehicle, electric cars? How many?
Or a bus.
Very good point. Or a train. But let's just, how many of you think we will have an EV? Okay. I think it was the same amount of hands, but much lower. It was like much more hesitant, but still hands. Okay. The third, also very relevant, very important. How many of you think that the financial reporting will equal and will be equally important as non-financial reporting in 10 years, not 20? 10 years? Okay. A bit hesitant again, take your time.
Much less agreement on
Definitely that. Less agreement. Good. Well, interesting. On some of the questions, we see some consensus. I think first two questions definitely give us some kind of idea of what is the direction, at least I think here, agreed in the room. What is the objective and where exactly we are heading? I think that's interesting. The last question, probably up for a discussion, but I think this is one of the things we also want to use this summit for, to have this conversation and actually discuss some of the, more of the how we get there, how we leverage the competitiveness of the transition. And okay, let's go maybe deeper on some of these topics. But over to you.
So we often say that sustainability is like the elephant and the 5 blind men. Everybody's holding their own piece of the elephant and arguing that that's the most important part. It's the same with economies. So some will argue that security is more important. Others will argue, no, it's climate change because it's existential crisis. So what we want to do with the summit, and almost all of you are practitioners from either government, business or finance, so we actually want to involve you in quite a wide range of conversations today, tomorrow and on Wednesday. Today we will have a set of presentations that actually I think are very thought-provoking. I read them all yesterday night at 1 a.m. and I wouldn't say it really allowed me to sleep very much, but it was fascinating. So for the session after the coffee break, you can expect quite some powerful discussions around the shape of the economy, the competitive edge, what's going to happen with GDP and the transition, etc. So very exciting stuff. You also can, of course, check out the agenda. It is on your badges. There's going to be QR codes after every session. You can find photos of yourself if you fancy to see how you're doing today. There's also a participant list if you want to connect with people, so you can find who's here. And also, of course, if you want to meet someone or you want to figure out who else is like-minded, etc., don't be afraid to ask. All of us except me, because I don't know why I failed to do that, should have a little ISFC badge. So those are the organizers and part of the organization who can help you find someone or find the space that you wanted to go to, etc. But last but not least, we really want to thank our ongoing partners, because without partnerships, without collaborations, things do not happen. And one of our ongoing partners for many years has been Česká spořitelna, so huge thanks to Česká for being a great supporter every year. Also, European Investment Bank is one of our institutional partners. We partner on many events across the region, and it's always a pleasure to work with them. I also want to give out a special shout out to Ernst & Young, EY. They have been coming back to the summit and supporting from the early days, back when they were still a bit confused as to what we're trying to do, but it was a great success and it's been growing every year, so we're very happy to work with EY. The same goes for ING. That was one of the very earliest supporters, and we're very pleased to welcome some people from the global headquarters, and of course we're very delighted to have Eva Buchova as the CEO here in the Czech Republic. Raiffeisen Bank, we are very delighted to work across the region with Raiffeisen. They're doing some very interesting things in different countries, so it's been a real pleasure also to visit them a couple of weeks ago at the headquarters. We are working again in a repeat partnership with KPMG, especially interested in central banking and in a lot of the banking discussions. So it's been great to work with their team. And we also have OTP Bank, which is a repeat partner. And of course, least but not least, Citibank, whose CEO will deliver some very interesting, very exciting remarks on Wednesday based on his global travel. So I think it's going to be a real powerful medley of insights, and I think there's going to be some very interesting stuff happening there. And also we want to welcome our first-time partners, which is Panattoni, Econans, and Tangelo. So all of the partners have little tables outside, so if you want to meet them and understand who's behind the organizations and who's in the room, please use that as well.
And also, because I mean, it is all the partners, maybe just to mention, because as a think tank, this is not just one-off event we do, and suddenly some partners come and they're partner on this event. Exactly as Linda said, this is an ongoing conversation for actually multiple years in terms of different discussions, capacity buildings, events, focus on specific topics. But also, what is really nice to see, because I think this might be potentially the first year when we have an insurance company as well on the list of partners, Unica. Really glad to have them as one of the partners, because insurance company is incredibly crucial in the transition. And also, as you said, Econans, Tangelo, finally to see someone from more the digitalization side as well. So very interesting mix of partners. Now, we of course have some supporting partners. Unfortunately, let's probably not go through all of them, but we are very delighted to have you and also to collaborate with you. And just to go through the slides, we do also have auspices of the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of the Environment, and Ministry of Trade and Industry. And this here probably was meant to be the slide behind us, but luckily we have seen all the partners. And so one more time maybe to mention, we are very grateful for the collaboration, and we do hope that you will enjoy this 4th edition of the summit. You will meet some interesting people, you will learn some things, you will make some, potentially start some interesting collaborations, and I think we can slowly move on to the next part.
So we have great pleasure to welcome Sean Kidney, the CEO of Climate Bonds Initiative, and one of our earliest advisory board members. Sean's energy and his presence is remarkable. This is a man who, when you call him, you don't know whether he's in Brazil, Tokyo, New Zealand, or anywhere else. So you don't know who's going to show up on the screen, whether he's just been surfing or he's just been advising the Prime Minister of Japan. So we're very glad to have you on board, Sean, and the stage is yours.
Thank you.
The clicker.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here today. Thanks for supporting this great centre. The work that Linda, Julian and the team has done in the last few years across Eastern Europe has been exemplary, important, essential. Thank you for that. Good idea. You know the problem. We still have a challenge that hasn't gone away. Emissions have continued to rise. We are not making great progress in our global targets. As a result, we now have impacts starting to cut in. That's the background noise. By impacts, well, what do I mean? This year will be the hottest year on record in recorded history again. More people will die of heat this year than ever before in human history. This year. That's just this year. The impact of climate change is starting to cut in, and no amount of capricious, infantile tantrum behaviour is going to stop that. The tide is unfortunately going in the wrong direction. Clearly, the topic on everyone's mind is that capricious, infantile royalism that the US is trying to deal with at the moment. But as someone who has spent a lot of time in other parts of the world, I can tell you two things. In Asia, this is water off a duck's back. In Japan, we have no change to the policy things of the government, despite the Prime Minister having to deal with the US being forced to buy US gas, etc., etc. The domestic settings are very much settings. Japan has a thing called the GX program, Green Transformation Program, which on a GDP per capita level, it was bigger than the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, which is financing industry to shift to be competitive in the green revolution. Subsidies, tax credits, and various other things. In other words, the government has a vision where Japanese industry will lead the green revolution around the world. Now, some of their bets I'm not so convinced about, but you know what? They're making bets. They're doing what an economy that starts thinking about the future and the way the world is changing needs to do to stay competitive. And that's very much on the minds of the Japanese government. But it's not just in Japan. In India, where I was a few weeks ago, interviewing, amongst other people, the chairman of the State Bank of India at a conference we ran in Mumbai, there was no talk of the US. It wasn't even on the agenda in India. The State Bank of India has a green bonds program, a very large one, has a green deposit scheme for ordinary individuals, has ESG frameworks throughout its bank, and so on. The State Bank of India, by the way, has 520 million customers. This is no small bank. This dwarfs ING. Change is happening in different places. In Brazil, where we're working with the Ministry of Finance on preparing for COP, there is absolutely no diminution of agenda. Of course, in the context of the US madness, Lula is embracing Xi Jinping a couple of days ago and talking about exports to China. China is now the largest export partner. China is now the largest export partner. That may something that we need to be thinking about in Europe. Clearly, in the US, a few days ago, I met my friend Peter Kashian, who's the head of sustainability at CalPERS in the US. She said, Sean, we've taken all our DEI policies off the website. Nothing. We're not making any speeches around climate change anymore. Silent. So does that mean you're changing anything in your investment? Oh, no, no, no. We're investing exactly the same way. He was in Japan, where I met him, investigating green opportunities in Japan for CalPERS, because there might be fewer in the US going forward. They're thinking about changing their asset allocation. No change is happening in other countries with the essence of what's going on. But there are, of course, two things that are underway. One is no one wants to be a target if there's a risk at being a target. Well, that's understandable. I don't want to be criticised by Linda for anything. I'm going to change the suit I wear if I think she might prefer me to wear grey instead of my usual red suit. That's exactly what's going on in the US. There is a vaccination effect underway. A bit like the COVID vaccination. We have now all got antibodies to Trump. Carney in Canada. Albanese in Australia. My God, the Romanian election last night. And maybe the Polish election next week. We'll see the impact. There is clearly a vaccination effect happening around the world. Now, the more the capricious infantile king rants and raves, the more you will see the vaccination effect. And I say that very deliberately, because make no mistake, what we're seeing in the US is no different to what we saw 300 years ago. It's exactly the same. The court, the courtiers, the paying $4 million to have dinner with the king, the big gifts and so on, and the idea that signing executive order is enough to run government. This is just straightforward, simple, old royalism. I'm going to say fairly poor royalism. Think more Louis XV rather than Louis XIV. Perhaps not the Austro-Hungarian emperors who had to have a slightly more inclusive approach often to running their kingdoms. More the Tsars of Russia, Peter the Great, for example. In Europe, we've had a long history of dealing with errant kings. We have to recover that past history to understand how to survive a neighbour that has gone over to royalism, and then how to manage that within our own way. But amongst investors, which is what really worries me, it's very clear that the change is not leading to substantive changes of activity. Why? Because this is a substantive issue. You know, we have big things happening in the world. One is we've got changes as a result of policy in the past and new countries. You know, think about what's happening in the world. Solar and renewable energy in most countries are cheaper than any other form of energy. This is according to the International Energy Agency. I'm on the Finance Advisory Board there. When it isn't, it's because there's policy steps avoiding or working against renewables, like in Indonesia, where the state energy company PLN is bankrupt, effectively. So therefore, the government puts large imposts in the way of renewable energy to try and prop up revenues from the coal company. Okay, that's not sustainable in the long run, but that is happening in some places. But straightforwardly, solar is cheaper in most countries. Wind is cheaper in most countries now. There's the oddity. Why? Because in 2001, the German government brought in a feed-in tariff, which got copied around Europe and then got copied in China in 2006. Since 2006, the Chinese government has invested unbelievable amounts of money in renewable. Now, why is that? Well, partly air pollution, partly climate change, and something very important for Europe to understand now, energy security. They understood very clearly, and I can remember conversations 12 years ago about this in Beijing. They understood that the bulk of their liquid energy was coming through the Straits of Malacca. The US 7th Fleet could blockade that at a blink. If they wanted to maintain the economy, they needed to ensure they looked quickly diversified into other areas. So they've dramatically invested in renewables. Last year, they invested just in solar, 277 gigawatts of solar. And this year, it'll be higher again. It's about 45% of the global total, by the way. They've moved to electric vehicles for exactly the same reason. This is why the oil industry doesn't know what's coming. For energy security industries, China does not want to import oil, nor does it want to import gas if it can avoid it. And you've already seen peak oil in China. You will see now a slow collapse of oil demand, accelerating. 50% of all cars in China sold last year were electric, 50%. In Germany, it was 50% of fleet cars. We've got a way to catch up with retail cars yet. China's way ahead of us. And the cars they're making are, as a result, amazing. The latest BYD car has drivetrains in the wheels. You pull up next to a parking spot that's only got a couple of inches of leeway. You fiddle on your screen. The wheels turn 90 degrees in and it goes sideways. And I'm thinking, I want one of those. It's features that will sell these things. It's not cheapness, it's not climate change. And those features are coming through. You can already see the extent to which Chinese cars are dominating the world in emerging markets, where in Sao Paulo, in Lagos, in Australia for that matter, Chinese brands are popping up all over the place. Europe, we've got to get our act together. The world is being driven by policy settings that are consistent with climate change and security, while legacy industries keep saying, no, it's all right, more oil, more gas, it'll be perfectly fine. Energy security, I say, is important because, of course, what have we learnt in the last 3 months in Europe? Well, we had already learned in the last 3 years we can't trust Russia on gas. It's a geopolitical weapon. And now we've learned, oh, it's a geopolitical weapon for the US as well. We can't trust Trump on gas. So in Germany, where industry has been happily saying we can buy more gas from Qatar, yes, I like Qatar, they at least manage their methane leakage, unlike the US. But we do have a zone where Netanyahu is pushing very hard to bomb Iran. There's a little bit of geopolitical risk. And now we know that the risk of importing gas in the US in terms of our geopolitical relations is high. Not to mention, if you've read the science, that US gas leaks methane like a sieve. If you put US gas into a gas plant in Germany, the gas plant has the same emissions footprint as a coal plant. And I will happily go to Warsaw and say, do not close your coal plants and replace it with gas plants using US gas, because there is no climate improvement. Keep the coal plants. Everyone knows they've got to go in a short amount of time and work harder on the renewable energy agenda. Europe needs to get off gas. It can get off gas. So the discussion I was having in Japan last week was exactly this. They import 83% of energy. Large amounts through the Straits of Malacca. They've got the same problem as China had. There is significant risk of conflict in the South China Sea. There's only one option available to them, which is to dramatically increase their renewable energy effort. And they can. They have a lot of opportunity. They're currently planning to go from 20 to 40% by 2040. They could go to 80% with the appropriate support. Europe could do the same thing, both domestically and regionally. We have enormous renewable energy capacity. We are not able to sell Spanish renewable into Germany because France won't agree to the full interconnectors. We are not able to buy Egyptian solar because Athens is blocking a DC connector across the Mediterranean. We can't sell Moroccan renewable directly into the European market, or at least one company is trying to. They're building a DC line underwater from Morocco through to the UK to Rotterdam, simply because we can't sort out cross-Pyrenees border connections. Europe has to get its act together on this. It's a security issue. It's a defence issue, and we have that opportunity. And it will be a regional bloc issue. Because if we have these relationships with Northern African countries, we will make them wealthier and tie them into our European economy the way they need to be. We need that regional security. The Trump vaccination supports all of this work. Green bonds are simply a very simple idea. We have this vast capital pool sitting around looking for places to invest. And at the same time, we discover that we have to invest some $9 trillion a year in solutions, mitigation solutions of climate change. Note that only about $3 trillion a year is new capital. This is a McKinsey study. At least this chunk here, $6 trillion, is reordering of existing capital flows. You're buying a car, you're buying electric now, not petrol. That's what I mean. You're investing in a water utility, you're making sure the water utility is addressing climate change within its plan. There is a CapEx penalty. Solar costs more up front than a gas-fired power station. The running costs are a lot lower, but you've got to find more capital up front. We are in this incredible moment in history where we have the capital. We have a very large capital requirement to address all these things. But in the last 70 years, we've been creating, all around the world, large pools of savings. It's one of the great successes of the modern economy. In pension funds, in insurance funds, in sovereign wealth funds for that matter, we have $130 trillion just of institutional investment capital. In fact, we're flooded with capital. Most capital has difficulty finding places to invest nowadays. And one other thing about that capital is it understands climate change. We have long-term pools of capital that are by fiduciary mandate required to pay your pensions when you retire in 20 years, 30 years, maybe in Hugh Wheelan's 40 years case. And And they are thinking about the risks to be able to pay your pension when you retire. They have actuaries working on long-term issues. They understand climate because they read. I'll leave it at that. They read. You only have to read the science to understand what's going on. And I'm happy to have a conversation over coffee afterwards with anyone who would like to get some leads on that. The US government, unfortunately, is not reading. You know, I came out of a meeting of the OECD a couple of weeks ago where OECD people were telling me of the memos that had been sent by White House staffers to remove the word climate from every document. They were looking at footnotes. Take the word climate out of here. Take it out of here. I mean, haven't they got a job to do? That's the level of pettiness and ignorance involved in that. And that's what it is. In the meantime, the OECD is happily removing the word climate and getting on with its work to address climate, as it always has. The capital we have is there. The proof that the capital will move is in the green and sustainable bond market. This is one market only, but in that market, we've grown from when the EIB issued its first climate awareness bond in 2008. Nina Krevy is here somewhere. There she is, who was involved in that, to a market that is now about to hit this week $6 trillion US outstanding. That's the bonds we consider consistent with the science. There's actually been about 7.2 trillion issued, but there's a lot of flaky stuff in there. But the bulk of it is very solid. ING's bonds are very good. I want to say that on the record right now. This is proof of concept. That's all it is. Investors will move and will invest if you give them a chance to invest in something which has a reasonably equivalent risk yield with a bonus feature that addresses their long-term risks. And that's what it's all about. It's about, for the issuer, investor engagement. It's about widening your book to get more investors in. It may be about a greenium, a modest price benefit, but it's not a driver for the market. I can talk about that again over coffee afterwards as well. The point is, it exists. It's now gone way beyond the development banks of the world. The EIB is still a huge issuer of green bonds. But now we have sovereigns. Globally, sovereigns are 50% of the bond market. They're only 24% of this market and growing like a bullet. We saw the Chinese government come to market with its first green sovereign a few weeks ago. And this is continuing to grow. The French government, I was at the Agence France Trésor on Friday, are planning to increase their program in the next years, and so on and so on and so on. We see sovereign issuance in the region. Poland was actually the world's first green bond issuer, weirdly enough. It was a good program. They did it to beat the French, who were trying to come to market first. Long story. But the bond actually is quite good, the allocation of proceeds, and continue to be. But we've seen Slovenia, Serbia, Romania, Latvia, Lithuania, and even Macedonia issue a small green bond. And I'm expecting Czechia in the very near future. Again, that's a coffee break conversation. We've seen on the back of that the growth of sustainable finance. This is a map of taxonomy's work. At Climate Bonds, we developed this crazy idea of a taxonomy in 2012. We got the Chinese government to adopt it in 2015. That's now underpins the Chinese green bond market, the world's second largest after Europe. Europe is 50% of green bonds globally. The European Commission adopted a recommendation we made in a high-level expert group in 2017, and you know the story there. Is it perfect? No. Does it need reform? Yes. Has that had an enormous impact? Absolutely. A common language around sustainable contributions has gone viral. We now have some 60 countries in the world with taxonomy projects of one form or another, largely based on the European model. We have a common understanding of what is green transport in Singapore, in Brazil, in France, and in Australia. This has been incredibly important for financial markets. It's still a little bit wonky. We're working on interoperability projects and various other things, but it has gone crazy. In different markets, we have much deeper levels of sustainable finance regulation. In China, we have incentives, the central bank. If you're a bank like ING and you post green bonds as collateral at the liquidity lending window of the central bank, you get a 1% discount on funds. Very nice to have in Europe. If only we could get that going. And numerous other incentives. There are multiple provinces in China, each of which is about the size of the German economy, which has got its own local incentives to grow green finance. But in Australia, we've just seen the launch of the Australian taxonomy and a bunch of other incentives for green finance. In Japan, I mentioned the Green Transformation Program. The regulator has been pushing transition plans for companies, which I'll come back to in a minute, and many other programs. In India, we've got incredible penetration of renewables. There is no new investment in coal-fired power in India because of the extent to which government has been promoting renewable energy. Prime Minister Modi is a solar nut from his days as the Chief Minister of Gujarat. But it's not only that, it's also the investment in green industries. I have a long-running conversation with JSW Steel, the largest steel company in India, which is pushing very hard on green steel investments going forward. They've issued sustainable bonds in the area, for example. Would I like them to do more? Yes. Are they doing a lot? Absolutely. It's extraordinary. Transition is hard. Shifting to a low carbon, and a climate resilience economy takes a lot of work. It's not easy. It requires close collaboration between public and private to do it. An individual company is going to find it very difficult to do without an enabling environment. And that's the conversation we're having at JSW in India. In Brazil, I've already mentioned nature in particular in Brazil, and so on and so on. And of course in Canada, where I advise the Sustainable Finance Action Council, a lot is happening. The new frontier is resilience. I mentioned heat. We have to prepare our cities fast. I don't know what the temperature is going to be in Prague this year, but I can tell you in Mumbai, it is scary. Probably in London it's going to be scary as well. We are not prepared in northern countries. And it was scary last year, you already know that, in Spain, in Athens, in Sicily. But it's not just the physical aspects of climate. It's also the consequent effects, the social impact, the economic impact, the infrastructure impact, the health system impacts, and so on. We've published a taxonomy, 1,400 areas that have to be looked at if we're going to address this issue. Think of this as a broadening of the universe for green finance. It allows the Czech government to include more things in its green bond program, at the very minimum. But it is now critically important for investors. And by the way, this isn't just feel good. This represents lower risk. This is a way to reduce default risk. That's essentially what it is. Now, that's the key to what we're doing here. We're not doing stuff on sentiment. We're doing stuff because the numbers show if you act on these things, you are going to be a better financial bet in the future. S&Ps, Moody's, Fitches are incorporating these sort of things already in their data sets. Next, transition finance is not just about compliance, which is what we ended up getting lost on in Europe. It's not about just doing what the regulator wants. It's about preparing for a future which is different. The real word here is business planning. Business planning in the context of an economy that is now changing rapidly. Policy push has led to energy change, electric vehicle change. What are the consequent impacts for motor parts companies in Hungary, etc., etc., etc.? Climate impacts will lead to different tolerance levels for steel, for buildings, and so on. What are the opportunities for a company to make money in that changed environment? If we don't consider this, if we don't look at this, if we don't argue this on the basis of opportunity, nothing will happen. And frankly, it will have been a waste. If we simply do this to make sure we put in the right paperwork for regulators, we will fail. Business needs to understand the world is changing. Different businesses will prosper. And that's what transition planning is fundamentally about. Second, we are now seeing national investment pipelines around transition becoming the norm. We will hold a summit at COP this year with 12 leadership countries in the national investment pipelines, $1 trillion of investments on the table. Every country needs a transition plan. And then finally, we need innovation in public-private collaboration. We do not do this leaving it to industry to change and saying, go and fix up transition. Government, the public sector, has a responsibility to actively create the enabling environment to allow business, to allow banks, to allow finance to change. That is happening. The future, if we do this, if we create this, will be a future we'll be happy to leave for our children. If we don't, we have disaster. I'm confident we will, because despite the noise from Washington, D.C., the train has left the station. It's underway. We just now need to speed it up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean, for the thought-provoking remarks and actually setting the scene very well, bringing in the very important parts about energy, about security, and about what kind of future we're building. And I think public-private partnerships, of course, we hear that time and again, but now we also need to talk about how to make them happen and how to mobilize investment. For those who arrived a bit late and then had to wait for extra seating, please do move forward. We do have a lot of space, well, quite a bit of space at the front. So if you want to have a better view, please do move forward. We have some moment. Oh, I can see some people arriving. Please come to the front. There's seating at the front. And now I have the pleasure to invite Hugh Wheelan, a financial journalist, to the stage. He is the founder of Responsible Investor, and one of those people who, if you travel the world again, you will see him moderating and speaking at many events. And you should also follow him on LinkedIn for some interesting content. And we also have the pleasure to welcome Anne-Sophie Castelnau from ING. She's the global head of Group Sustainability. So we're very pleased that Anne-Sophie has traveled all the way to Prague. This shouldn't be taken as a given. We're very pleased that people actually make the effort, because travel nowadays is a lot and it's getting busier. So thank you so much for coming, and the stage is yours. Thank you.
Is working okay. It is working okay. Good morning, everyone. Nice to be here. Thanks to Sean for his opening remarks, and thanks to Linda for presenting us. It's nice to be known as the global moderator, following on from Sean, the global agitator. It's great to have everyone here. Nice to see you all in the room for this fireside conversation. And it's great to be here with Anne-Sophie Castelnau, Global Head of Sustainability at ING, which already been introduced, but big global bank based out of the Netherlands. Anne-Sophie is from France, now living in the Netherlands, and I'm living in the Netherlands too. So we were just chatting about what it's like to be expats in the Netherlands. And this is labelled as a fireside conversation. I think Anne-Sophie and I would probably like to have a fireside conversation where we have a nice glass of brandy, maybe even a cigar. But in this context, I think fireside conversation,
to you,
possibly, yeah. Maybe not. But in this context, I think this is about a fireside conversation for lighting the fire in the morning and getting a cup of coffee going and actually instigating some good chat about what we're doing here in sustainable finance, and no one better to be here with. Just to very briefly introduce me, based on the intro earlier, I've been a finance journalist for coming on to 30 years, and then specializing in sustainability and sustainable finance. I've worked for a lot of newspapers, both launched media organizations and been a frontline reporter for a long time. It's great to be able to have this conversation with someone like Anne-Sophie at a critical juncture. Sean just outlined what's happening here in terms of serious energy issues, sovereignty issues, security issues. And I wanted to start by asking Anne-Sophie, within that, what is in your in tray at the moment in terms of the work you do? How big is it? How many in-trays do you have? And what are the major things that you're thinking about in the current energy, finance, investment, risks to the bank side of things on sustainability? I'll leave it there. Over to you. Great to have you here.
Thank you, and very happy to be here. And yeah, I was very happy to travel from the Netherlands to come back to Prague. I mean, I've been to Prague 30 years ago, so it has changed a bit, I must say. But it was a very nice discovery yesterday. Yeah, so our plate is indeed quite busy these days, because we are at a very crucial moment. We have to make it happen, basically. So I think that financial institutions in general have spent some time defining what good looks like for them and what they want to achieve, and now comes the time of implementing that. That's why we are indeed quite busy with that, embedding all the theory into practices. We have an approach for decarbonizing our loan book. We are a big lending organization. We have 600,000 billion of loans. Half for our wholesale banking franchise, half is a very large mortgage book. And we know exactly where our emissions coming from. So reducing emission is our key target. So it means that now we have the direction that's science-based. We are even SBTi validated now with our targets, but we need to ensure that it's really happening. So basically that our bankers know how to get there, know what to finance, know how to change the way they engage with clients in a different type of conversation, so as to foster that transformation of society. So this is, I would say, the first pillar. And that comes to indeed financing the right thing, really making sure that we understand for each sector what needs to happen, the evolution, the technologies from the future, and really engaging into strategic conversation with clients. And it also means that we need to rethink the way we look at our mortgage portfolio. As I said, that's half of our book, and we want to also tackle that part, which is a completely different ballgame, meaning that we need to have a product so as to enable also private individual to contribute to that transformation. So that's really driving down emission, financing the right thing, and embedding that into our general conversation that is making us happy and busy. And for that, we need to engage. We need to engage with governments. We need to engage with our peers. We need to engage with industry associations, because that's not a problem we are going to solve on our own. We need really to collaborate with others, and that advocacy bit about how to change the system in which we are is crucial.
Is that something you do a lot of, talking?
Yes, more and
as
more.
Sean was mentioning, with policymakers,
more and
trying to
more.
get that public-private
Because
collaboration?
we have those conversations with our clients, and we hear them, and they tell us, yes, but I'm sorry, it's too expensive for me. I cannot go that direction. I cannot, I would say, move from coal to hydrogen when I am a steel maker, because that's too costly. So we need to advocate for having in place the right policies, the right incentive, or the right, I would say, mandatory transformation given by the government if we want to make it happen.
Okay. Let's just focus on you mentioned the loan side of the business and the mortgages side of the bank. Mm-hmm. What are the areas where you as an organisation see clear rationale for financially interesting and sustainably interesting investments? Let's call them investments for the purpose of this, but of course,
What's the business case?
Yeah, what's the business case effectively for your bank acting on sustainability right now in what it does?
So, first of all, I mean, I'm a banker. Of course, I'm in charge of sustainability these days, but I was raised and born and raised as a banker. And the first thing...
Is that possible? Because some will be... no, sounds good though.
And the first thing I learned was about managing risk. So as an organization, we want to also be a more resilient organization. And it's very important that our clients are also more resilient. And that's also the starting point. By supporting those transformations and ensuring we understand precisely where are the risks in our books, be it transitional risk or physical risk, we help our organization and our clients to be more resilient. So this is the first, I would say, building block. The second one is about opportunities, and Sean was referring to that. I mean, the transition that is required requires much more capex than before. I think Sean was showing 3.5 trillion indicated by McKinsey. The IEA refers to 5 trillion even. So this is massive. So for us as banker, we have a lot on our plate that we can contribute to, and that's a massive opportunity, provided that you are seen as knowing what you are talking about. And that enables having a much more strategic conversation, bringing our client into that conversation. Because when you understand the sector you finance, when you understand what needs to happen in terms of change, you get access to something much more interesting than just answering to requests for, I would say, bilateral facilities in a very basic way of doing business. So we are already changing the way we engage and the focus we have in engaging with our clients, which puts us in a very, I would say, ideal position to get more mandates. So we've really seen that strategic advisory role around transformation, around sustainability, is bringing us a lot in terms of position in the market and ability to build more, I would say, intimate relationship with our clients.
And Sophie, are you seeing that the policy and regulatory environment and the pricing out there? I mean, you're a banker, so you're looking at whether policy over time is tightening and whether pricing is becoming interesting for your own book and for the book of your clients. Are you seeing that starting to crystallize now or not? And if not, why not?
Yeah, I think there's still room for, I would say, in regulation. We are indeed a regulated entity, and we can expect that at some point financing transformation will be reflected into the way we calculate our own RWAs. And that's not yet the case. We have models that are backward-looking, while indeed we are taking a forward-looking view when we think, okay, we need to go into that direction because it makes sense for the economy. So that's I would say, a tricky point. And indeed, we struggle with that. But as I said, we also see that the clients that have started transforming themselves, they are the ones whose credit rating are also the more solid ones in many cases. Okay. Of course, some of them are making choices in terms of new technologies. But this is risk we also are ready to take, provided that we understand and that they are well mitigated, hence that importance of engaging with governments, with regulators, with central banks, so to really, I would say, bundle that all together. But I agree with you, there's still some work to be done in that area.
Yep. And maybe just looking at the other side of things. I mean, you're a big bank, so you have a high profile, and there's a lot of expectation out there amongst civil society organizations, NGOs, nasty journalists like me who are asking you questions and saying, why aren't you doing more? How do you, what are the things that you find difficult to do as a bank in terms of the expectations around sustainability shift that you have on you, and I mean, these things are even getting into the law now, which, you know, I mean, we're both based in the Netherlands, so we know that there's a lot of pressure there on banks like ING. How does that fit into the role you have at the moment, and what do you try and do about that?
Yeah, we are in a very interesting moment in which, indeed, some people are telling us, but you are crazy, what are you talking about? That's too much focus on sustainability on one side, and on the other side, we have indeed some NGOs telling us, we are really not doing enough, you should be blamed for that, we are going to bring you to court. Say, okay. That's a bit schizophrenic, as my CEO sometimes says. Don't share that beyond that room.
Won't tell anyone.
But that's why it's extremely important for us to stay on our line and to reflect on, okay, why are we doing certain things? And that's why it's so important that our approach is science-based and core into data and a very clear grounding, I would say. But with NGOs, the dialogue is there. We have the same concern. We share the same, I would say, feeling about the urgency about solving the climate crisis. Yet we disagree on the approach. The transition takes time. We are still very dependent on fossil fuel as economies, so we cannot just unplug that part of the world. We need, on the contrary, to be prepared for that transformation. That's why we focus so much on renewable these days. But I think we need to listen to those voices and recognize that they are a role to play. Still, indeed, being engaged with our clients, because stepping out of a sector doesn't solve anything. What we want is to support the transformation of the economy. So that's why that transition period is so important, and we need to accompany those clients who need some time. I mean, steel I was referring to that. It takes 2-3 years to build a different type of factory. So those numbers will only show up in terms of decarbonization in a few years. Huh? We need to accompany that moment of change.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Last question, and just as we sort of begin this day with a good cup of coffee around the fire, how do you personally and professionally try to sort of puff yourself up against this backlash that we're seeing around sustainability, climate, anything to do with sort of so-called kind of woke capitalism that's been lumped in with? How do you sort of reassure yourself that Sean said the train has left the station and this is all happening?
I'm not going to talk about therapy, but talk about...
We could talk about that. It's more...
Oh, basically, I keep the organization engaged and focused. I mean, again, we come back to why we are doing stuff. The physical reality has not changed, and climate is changing and is going to hurt us. The physical reality is there. So, indeed, being ensured on the why, science-based, and taking action is something that is also helps you to really be convinced that you are actively participating to transforming the world is extremely rewarding. So that's something we keep in mind and we continue to follow. But indeed, getting rid of the noise and focusing on action is the best option.
Yeah. Do you think we could see more, maybe just a very quick answer, do you think we could see more of the kind of collaborative work amongst banks with policymakers? I mean, we've seen that quite a big challenge to some of those big coordinated member groups. Do we need something a bit new and different there?
I think this is a new flag that in particular the NZBA has taken. So far the focus was not so much about advocating and finding ways to collaborate and work with each other, and this is now on the agenda and we want to contribute to that.
The Net Zero Banking Alliance.
Yes.
Okay, great. Our thanks to Anne-Sophie. We're out of time, but Anne-Sophie's going to be around, I think, for coffee and
for the next
session. Sorry, you're absolutely right. I meant to tee you up at the end there and say Anne-Sophie is going to be on the next session, talking about regulation, of course, which huge topic at the moment around the whole EU omnibus, around the Sustainable Finance Directive, Green Transition Plan, etc., etc. Look forward to that. Our thanks to Anne-Sophie for this fireside chat this morning. Thanks to you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hugh. Now we're going to rearrange the stage slightly to welcome the big discussion. So we actually have the great pleasure of the now former chair of the EU Sustainable Finance Platform, Helena Viñes-Fiestas, joining us today live. So Helena has been leading the platform with an iron fist. Trust me, having 40+ experts, high level, all very opinionated, trying to sort out EU sustainable finance, it's not an easy thing to manage. So Helena, thank you so much for coming to Prague. And to join her on the stage today, we have Andreas Hauer from the Erste Group. He's the head of sustainable finance. We have Piotr Dmuchowski, who I met years ago when he was still at HSBC, and we thought, wow, there's a leader on sustainable finance in Poland. So thank you for traveling to Prague. We also have Alice Mahova from EY, a partner who's been trying to drive the conversation here in the Czech Republic. And the last but not least, Petr Polach from Raiffeisen Group International, traveling not too far from Vienna. And actually, Petr is from the Czech Republic. So Welcome to the stage. Thank you very much. And the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Linda. I'm not sure what I think about that iron fist, yeah? Some sort of iron lady. It's so far away from the reality, yeah? But anyway, good morning to everyone. It's a real pleasure to be in Prague. Also back after 30 years, like you, Anne-Sophie. And after a really upbeat presentation from Sean and a fireside chat that has lightened the fire, as Hugh said, what about a little bit of regulatory talk to sort of like manage the fire, yeah? And sort of go back, appease the sentiment in the room, yeah? In December, last December, as we all know, a new commission and a new parliament, took office in Brussels, and this new commission has been underpinned to a certain way by two reports, right? Two reports, the Letter report, the Draghi report, which basically have questioned the EU priorities and put on the table very much the need to have competitiveness, security, and strategic autonomy as the top priorities. And this has left many of us with the conundrum of, well, is the Green Deal still a priority somewhere? Maybe has gone down the list, and at the same time, many people start questioning or even going as far as using the Green Deal and sustainability as the scapegoat for the lack of competitiveness. In the meantime, on the other side of the Atlantic, while we create, as Sean was saying, immunity towards what's happening on that side, the new US administration talks about deregulation, straightforward, at home and beyond. In Europe, we prefer the word simplification, and simplification has become, the word in vogue. But does simplification mean actually having a regulation, a regulatory framework that is more effective and is simpler but more effective? Or does it mean, or does it masquerade, real deregulation? So this is what we're going to talk about. And the first package of simplification, as we all know, is the infamous omnibus. So let's start talking about the omnibus first and how the Commission's intentions and the current negotiations are going in terms of simplifying the sustainable finance package. And then we will move towards the savings and investment union, because I truly believe that you cannot, both are two sides of the same coin. So let's start with the sustainable finance package. As we all know, the sustainable finance package had, I call it this big jigsaw, right, that has the taxonomy at the very core of it. So let's start with the taxonomy, whose main role was to mobilize capital towards sustainable investments, but it also aimed to provide that security to investors, right? That security of what they were investing in was actually sustainable, so to fight greenwashing and to provide the confidence to really mobilize the capital, yeah? So let's start with Pietro. Pietro, could you give us an overview of your views on what has worked on the taxonomy and what hasn't? And welcome.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the invitation. I'll try to share some personal experiences with taxonomy. So I've done a bunch of things. Linda already mentioned my banking career. Since then, I moved more into asset management. So I think I can have quite broad kind of perception. And from CE perspective, I think there were three things that really worked very well. And the first one, from the CE perspective, I think particularly important, is that it really allows to mobilize institutions and people around sustainability. And believe me, Sean mentioned the first green bond that was issued by Poland in 2016. I was working on the deal, structuring the deal, and I'm happy to share over coffee, information how it came up, that it really happened, and the fight with French was really fierce. It was Beijing trip actually took a large part in that, but that's a story for a coffee discussion. But since 2016, I I thought like, wow, we did this first green bond. Now it's going to develop. We're going to grow the market, etc. And then I started talking to banks, cities, etc. And still in 2019, I was hearing from board members of local banks, it's all marketing. It's bollocks. It will disappear in 2 years' time, whatever. 2 years after, they were issuing their green bonds. A discussion was completely different. It was the same when I was, working for an asset manager. We were developing the team to prepare the first taxonomy reporting, right? And it was much easier for me to get analysts in, to get resources in, etc., because this taxonomy is coming, we need to get the report out. And I could use the same people to actually start preparing products and strategies, investment strategies. That was my idea. The same people that will work on getting the data for the report would work to prepare new strategies. When I joined the company, the fund, there was one, let's say, green fund. When I was leaving, there were 6, so it helped, right? So mobilizing resources and mobilizing support from the seniors. That was really, really important. Second thing, it's very robust catalog. It's really hard to add things there. It's really well done, right? So it's quite powerful. So where it didn't work that well, I would say. First of all, it's too complex, that's for sure. Second, it doesn't link to other regulations. So there is a very interesting study that came out from Copenhagen Business School, I believe, this year. And if you have Article 9 funds, a sort of dark green funds, as some call it, 80% of their investment is sustainable, but only 40% is taxonomy aligned. So there is inconsistency. And the last bit, and perhaps there will be time to dive on that deeper later on, it doesn't provide the incentives. So what Sean mentioned, I think we can maybe chat on that later.
Really, thank you so much. I think I'm going to momentarily park the issue around SFDR. How does it, the breach of SFDR? Because I want to bring it to the conversation a little bit later. But I want Alice, and welcome, Alice. I want you to tell us what you think before we start looking at the link to other regulations. What are your thoughts about the proposed amendments to the taxonomy delegated acts, as part of the omnibus package?
Thank you for that question. And my experience with taxonomy actually goes to similar time like yours. So we've been helping clients to implement taxonomy and CSRD for a number of years, so I can confirm the complexity. I think that after the double materiality, actually, taxonomy was, let's say, the most complex topic of it all. But I think the simplifications that are coming or on the table are going to be very welcomed. So, for example, the simplification around materiality. So right now we didn't have any materiality, so companies had to look at everything. What the proposal is to have the 10% OPEX, CAPEX or revenue, which I think will help, especially for the multi-sector companies, so they can focus on what is actually important. So let's say that that can help going forward. What I think also helps is actually bringing together the technical people and the finance people, because we've seen a lot of, let's say, confusion around technical criteria and then how to transform it into the finance criteria. So having that understanding, I think helps a lot. Industry focus, another one. So for example, in the Czech Republic, we've been focusing on real estate and what EU taxonomy means for real estate. There's a lot of work done on that level, and you can see how that actually brings things into practice when you have that sector focus. So super important on that one. And from let's say incentive perspective, other than green bonds, I think that what you mentioned as well, the incentives and how finance institutions actually are going to be using EU taxonomy or can use EU taxonomy as an incentive would be very welcome. So I think that's my main takes on EU taxonomy.
Yeah, thank you, Alice. It's really interesting because the ones that we've been working on the taxonomy for quite a while now, we can say. At the very beginning, the taxonomy was really meant to be a little bit like the recommended daily intake in food products, right? That reference point, that tells you, it doesn't oblige you, to invest in A or B, or how much sugar or salt you need to put into your product. But it helps, investors and everyone else to know, right, whether or not 25 grams of sugar is too much or too little, right? That was the intention. But in practice, what we have experienced is that the taxonomy has worked the best when it comes to guide CapEx investments from companies. That the missing piece, referring to what you were just saying, Piotr, and what you just said, Alice, is the bridge with the investor community. And while it's the level of complexity, as you were mentioning, it's maybe the right one to a certain extent for CapEx, for looking forward to new investments. If you're the one conducting the activity, it clearly doesn't work for financial markets participants and many times for companies looking backwards, right? So there is a tension there, right? But it has, as I was saying, really worked, I think, for CapEx investment. We already count 720,000, 720 billion invested, in Europe of only the 2,100 companies that have reported. So pretty good in that sense, but missing that link. And talking about links, Petr, and good morning. Could you tell us, let me see if I pronounce it correctly, Raiffeisen? Yeah, there you go. It's a pretty active green bond issuance. Do you think that the proposed amendments, as Alice was saying, the materiality, but also the review of do no significant harm criteria, I think we all agree that it's the do no significant harm criteria where most of the simplification needs to go. Do you think that will affect the uptake of the green bond standards?
Thank you and good morning. I would very much like, again, to refer also to Sean's presentation, because the green bond and sustainable bonds overall became already very well accepted the market standard, and the product as such has a very strong perception of investors. So with here, we are very happy, and I have to say our clients are focused mostly on it's practical, it works, they have their frameworks, they have ratings in place, and you see that the issuances on the bond, conventional bond side, I think the share of the sustainable or green bonds is more than 20%. When it comes to the EU green bond standards and linkage to the EU taxonomy, we personally see it so for the time being as a still too rather difficult and very complex. I can also refer to our experience with the green asset ratio. We spent so much time in green asset ratio, and you know how many EU taxonomy aligned loans we did in the whole, last one and a half year? I think 5 or 7. And our green asset ratio is 0.7%. When I come to our ESG eligible assets, which we are printing, either bonds, loans we are doing, in line with the ICMA principles, in line with the international standards, there our portfolio is more than 20%. So when we come to the practical way of doing it, we are there, and I believe we support a lot of very good investments, and also not so far have not been really engaged in any potential greenwashing. So what I wanted to say, there is no game changer. There's no game changer because when you start a taxonomy, EU taxonomy discussion with clients, it becomes too difficult and very, very, very cumbersome. Until now, there are only 5 bonds under the EU GBS. Only 5 bonds on the market. So you see, we hope that it's just a start. We hope that it will kick off, right? Yes, it will. But the way to get there is still very important that we make it more practical and more understandable also to the investors. Because the investors, they need to understand what they are buying in, and there is still a very big part of the responsibility on them. Yeah. And here we see it's a bit of a tricky game for the market. Yeah. So in a nutshell, we would very much, again, advocate, and being on the business side, advocate for simplification and getting it more practical and to focus on what really matters and what is also measurable and quantifiable.
Let me challenge you in one aspect, Petr. First, it has to be said that the EU Green Bond Standard only started, right, in December. So, we need to be a little bit more gentle to it, yeah? And there was already a few green bonds that they were aligned with the taxonomy. I come from Spain, the Spanish market, the Spanish government, for example, issue one. But the second one is that my understanding, and please challenge me, is that the main problem of applying the taxonomy has been the do no significant harm. So if the do no significant harm, it's really simplified, yeah, and I mean seriously simplify for the application of green bonds, then would the taxonomy really help to uptake the EU green bond standard?
I do agree and appreciate, of course, it's very short time on the market. So that's very clear, and we do hope that it will help, right? So we do hope that it will be the case, and on our end, it's of course full support. So our conversation with the clients hopefully will get into a more positive momentum. I have to say now, those clients who are already active on the market and being active with ESG strategies, with those clients we are regularly dealing and doing business. But there are not really major inflow of new clients coming. Of course, this is a bit of a consequence of Omnibus and some set of changes, because many of them are saying it's not our issue anymore, we don't need to care, right? So those who were cultivated, with those we are working very nicely, but now we don't see the uptake of new potential customers. And here we hope that it will also, change a bit, and they will get convinced probably once they see that the things are not so complicated and so difficult.
Absolutely. You point out to something really important, which is, the whole announcement of the Omnibus has created regulatory uncertainty, and that has paralyzed because companies and investors alike, financial institutions, don't really know what the outcome is going to be, yeah? So we need to bear of that. Keep that in mind. Talking about uncertainty, right? We do not know what's going to happen with the CSRD ESRS, yeah, the Sustainability European Standards. Alice, if we could step back, could you give us an assessment of the proposal, on the table of the ESRS that the FRAC did made? What did it get right? What was, what needs to change? And can you also touch upon double materiality and the materiality assessment, as two of the points have been most contested?
So it was mentioned here whether regulation is actually a driver for change. And after our experience with CSRD, I do believe it is. And I have to say that I'm really, personally sorry about the omnibus situation, because I think that a lot of the professionals and a lot of the people on the market who've been working very hard towards, CSRD implementation, have been taken by surprise by the whole thing. Why do I say that it's a change management thing? Because we've seen companies with whom we've been working since, let's say, 2020, when they started, they had zero, like in our region, they were not reporting on GRI or anything. We've been educating them, as you say, they implemented ESG strategies, they went on and had SBTI, CDP, so all these really, changing matters. And they were ready to go out and show it to the world in 25. And now you have this situation and the whole backlash around ESG, and I just think it's really, really disappointing, to be honest. On the other hand, to be, let's say, optimistic a bit more, talking to our clients, also what we see that they are not stopping, so they continue, but you do see some, let's say, slower movement a little bit, so I think it will depend on the market. But when it gets realistic, it's about the climate risks and transition plans, for example. So we have many clients now who've done their basic, ESG strategy. They know what KPIs they have to report. They know how to calculate CO2, but now they come to us and they say, can you actually help us with the climate risks? And that, when it really hits the table, that's what you were talking about as well, when they start understanding what are the financial impacts of climate risks, that's when it starts getting real for the management. So that's why I believe that regulation, actually, which is where it all started for many companies in the region, can drive a positive change. What did we get well, and what did we get maybe what can be done better? What did we done well? I think it was the structure, the whole fact that you have to set targets, you have to show what actions you have to measure stuff. I think the structure of CSRD is really well thought through. What maybe could have been differently, it's too complex, a lot of standards. At some point I was thinking, if we had only focused maybe on the environmental part, kind of like the ISSB did, could that be the answer? Maybe it wouldn't be so overwhelming for the companies, right? But now that we actually worked through the whole lot after the first wave, I think we have a lot to learn from. So there is already a baseline, there is experience. So I don't even think it's that complex anymore because the companies have been through it successfully, and there is a way to show the others how to go about it. In terms of the double materiality, a lot of points that can be improved or precised. But one of them is, for example, differentiating between your own operations in the value chain. I think especially for the financial services, that was quite a tough task to actually differentiate. What do you have to report for your own operations and what is already downstream or upstream? So that's one of the items. The other one was impact materiality. I think that one was quite, let's say, challenging for the management of companies to understand and how to set the threshold, especially if there were no, let's say, quantitative data when you were assessing the impacts. That was quite tricky. So they have some more guidance around the impact materiality. I think will help tremendously as well. And then there.
Can I ask you a question on that? Do you think that now that there's the review, we should scratch materiality assessment and just say this is mandatory, this is voluntary?
I think we sort of passed that point. I do see a lot of benefits in double materiality. I actually think that when it's done properly, it can show the management the real business case for sustainability. So when you assess your impacts, risks, and opportunities, and you really go through that exercise, you really do see the benefits and where you need to focus. So I wouldn't go back now to the, let's have the certain set of KPIs.
Excellent. Alice, EY has conducted a lot of work, extensive work on the actual indicators. You started talking a little bit about that, pointing out to the relevance of the climate and environmental ones. But could you tell us what are the key takeaways from the barometer? And now that at the same time that the Omnibus proposes, a cut on the scope, an 80% cut, to be precise, in terms of the number of companies that will have to report against the ESRS. It also proposes and has asked EFRAG to review the actual indicators. So which ones should we keep?
I'm not sure I have an answer to that. EFRAG is heavily working on it right now. But what we have is actually a study that we've done in EY across the reports that were published. There's about 200 of them, and then we have actually that were, let's say, published until the end of March. So we've done a study on those, and there were quite some interesting results. So, for example, the length of the report. There has been a lot of discussion how CSRD is going to make the reports very lengthy. So actually the range is from 35 pages to 398 pages. The average length of the report is 123 pages. So I think that's maybe not that different from what we had under GRI. What's also interesting that the number of pages actually doesn't correlate with number of material topics. So it's completely different sector by sector. Apparently financial services actually are one of the, let's say, lengthy ones. And services and technology and telco are one of the shorter ones. So all these interesting facts you can actually read in the barometer. In terms of the KPIs, I think it's not surprising that E1, S1 and G1 are the ones that were, let's say, most common out of the 200 and the subtopic related to it. E2, which was pollution to what was it? Pollution to biological, yeah, it was biodiversity. So that one was only reported by one company actually. So I think that also if EFRAG is going to look at our report, they're going to see which subtopics were, let's say, the least taken by the companies. So it's quite an interesting point from that perspective. And the barometer shows you different sectors and what they are up to. One more thing to transition planning, actually, and the action around it. So for 23, only 60% of companies who were reporting actually had a transition plan. In 24, already 80 to 90% of companies had a transition plan. So I think that also shows the importance of the regulation and how it drives the actions for the companies.
Thank you, Alice. Is the barometer available in your website?
It is, yeah, or on my LinkedIn, so.
All right, so everyone, send an invite to Alice. Pietro, what are your thoughts about the proposal, the Commission proposal on the omnibus related to ESRS and the current, if you want to talk about, the ongoing negotiations. And at the same time, I want you to particularly talk about what does it mean for investors and financial institutions?
Sure. So I'm just checking my notes here. It's not like I'm checking Polish elections. The results are out already. Guys, so yeah, regarding Omnibus, obviously there's been a lot of discussion. I'll just maybe be very brief and talk from the CE perspective. I think the one unintended consequence of Omnibus and the package is that it might even more crowd out sustainable investment from Central Eastern Europe. And why is that? The research I mentioned from Copenhagen Business School, it's from the start of the year, so probably doesn't include, this period of reporting. In Western Europe, around 25% of the companies, they are somewhat reporting, taxonomy alignment and data around that, OPEX, CAPEX. Not everything, but at least some of it. In Eastern Europe, it's 3%. And that was the outcome. So if you are building an investment portfolio, if you have, like in Poland, 50, 60 available stocks that you have some data about, I'm not saying precise data, it's impossible to build a diversified portfolio. So if you have sustainable kind of investment assets in a country like Poland, Czech Republic, etc., it's most likely invested in Western Europe. And if you look for a place where there's a lot of opportunities to make money on that, because the margins, the returns, and everything are much better, and I'm not even mentioning the decarbonization delta, that's obvious, then this is the place where the money should flow. So if we think about how to improve things, is really to streamline money where it should go. And if I think how I would simplify it, I will not reduce the number of companies that need to report. For the big companies, I think the reports, they can do it, they manage it, it's possible. I did it in a big financial institution. We did it mostly internally. It didn't cost that much money. It was possible to do. Where I would go is simply maybe for a wide range of companies, which is focused on 14 main principal adverse impacts. It's 14 data points, the most relevant ones, and for majority of investors, that would do a massive, improvement in terms of availability of potential stocks or bonds or whatever, because you would have more data.
Yeah, Piotr, 14. You're thinking that the principal adverse impacts should not be changed, the actual indicators for CFDR, but instead it should be the 14 indicators that all companies should report. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
Simple answers.
Simple answer. Okay, that's a proposal. Very interesting one, because I think some of us would say we agree with your general perspective, but we think that the principal adverse impacts maybe should change, and maybe we should concentrate on climate and a few,
just stick with
really
5,
relevant.
even better.
Even better. Well, I think that we need a little bit more than 5 for climate, and we definitely need transition plans. But the idea is there, yeah?
Smaller companies.
For smaller companies.
Medium size.
Less
right?
indicators, but mandatory to all of them. Well, for all non-SMEs, right? Good, we're getting there. I have 2 quick more questions on CSRD, and I see the clock ticking. Anne-Sophie, a very straightforward question. There's a school of thought in Europe and outside that says, look, why going through a massive review of ESRS when we can just, take ISSB, adopt ISSB, and forget about it, yeah? And that school of thought, I would say, has a pretty good lobbying, cloud behind it, yeah? Supporting it. Should we do that? Should we just, take on board ISSB, forget about double materiality or any links to the rest of the EU policy framework? Should we give our sovereignty of deciding what our companies should report on to IFRS and ISSB?
Yeah.
It's not a yes, or
yes,
is it?
That's not a yes, definitely, and I'm going to explain why. I think what Europe has decided to go after is a sort of leadership when it comes to sustainability, and the Green Deal is definitely about that. And when we talk sustainability, we look at the two sides of the coin. On one side, risk, that's the financial materiality, and on the other side, this is impact. What impact companies are having on the climate, on biodiversity, on social items, on governance, and so on. So I think ISSB is a very nice first layer of information, and that's for investors very relevant to understand the risk they take when they invest in a company. So I think the idea of having something global for the world to capture those data is very relevant. But I think that's it's extremely important also to understand how to solve those issues. And that's impact materiality that is bringing that. That's understanding when you lend money or when you invest in a company, how that company affects the ecosystem to which it belongs is extremely important. And we need those data. So I'm all for double materiality. I'm all for also giving more guidance for indeed companies who need to, I would say, report on that. But for me, this is extremely relevant to look at the both sides of the coin.
Thank you, Anne-Sophie. Can I have a raise of hands who believes that Europe should just take ISSB as it is, full stop? Nobody. Nobody. Okay. Maybe we should... Linda, make sure that we send it to the Parliament, European Parliament, and the Commission, yeah? No hands. Before I close the ESRS chapter, yeah, and we move to SFDR, very quickly, Andreas, we already, transition plan have come up, you know, a couple of times, how really relevant they are, already really encouraging. Alice, 80 to 90% of the companies, you know, were reporting the transition plan. What do you think about the proposal in the omnibus that says, well, you have to adopt it, you have to develop it, adopt it, but you don't have to put it into effect? And what do you think about the new proposal of the rapporteur for the omnibus, who's saying, actually, we should just really scratch transition plans altogether?
I'll answer it in the context of decarbonizing a loan portfolio. Anne-Sophie was already alluding to it. So you usually have a mortgage portfolio where you look at objects and so on, but then you have certain carbon-intensive industries which are typically conducted by large corporate undertakings. As a financing bank, you need to have a view on the time-bound reduction plan of greenhouse gases and the underlying capex, how it governs, how embedded those targets are in the company strategy. And that's the framework. The transition plan covers much more, but if you don't have a mandate for a transition plan anymore, it will be ultimately the financing banks asking, be it on voluntary undertaking like Zero Banking Alliance or SBTi, or one should not forget there is also the bank supervision framework. There's now a guideline called the EBA guideline on the management of ESG risks, which was published in January, coming into force for the large banks in January next year. And so ultimately, if you don't mandate it on the corporate side, the banks have to ask those questions and you're pushing them into a role of a climate police. So coming back to your question, of course it helps us that there is a mandate for them.
Thank you so much. It's in the platform, we had one of the working groups, and one of our mandate was to start monitoring capital flows, right? And we developed a methodology, and in the methodology, not only we counted the investments in taxonomy, right, the capex, but also we look at exactly the same companies what, a broader, how much more CapEx they had invested in transition finance. And we defined that by a methodology, simple methodology based on credible transition plans. So for 2023, if the CapEx investment had been 250 billion, there was 206 billion extra by the same companies due to the transition plans, right? So we all started to get a picture of, how much, we started getting a picture of both, how the taxonomy and transition plans come up with two really good tools in order to mobilize capital for transition, and on the other hand, how important it is to really develop the methodology and to start monitoring the capital flows that give us exact information on where the money is going and which economic activities are being underinvested and maybe which technologies and economic activities we need to incentivize or what type of investments we need to incentivize. Anyway, I just wanted to flag that of the importance of transition plans, and taxonomies for transition plans. But moving towards SFDR, I think that we all agree that the bridge between taxonomy and ESRS towards SFDR has not yet been done, yeah? The Commission was very conscious about it because it launched an assessment of SFDR, already, some time ago. We have published almost 3 reports on that. So Anne-Sophie, can you tell us from ING's experience, what do you think it has worked? So let's give SFDR a little bit of credit. What has it achieved? Yeah, and then where do you see the real challenges?
Yeah, well, SFDR has been useful because it has put the topic of sustainability into the client conversation. And now when you go to your bank and you want to invest money, you are asked, is sustainability a topic you want to hear about? Is it an angle that is important that you want to bring into the assets in which you want to invest? So that part is useful, and we have seen as ING a movement of flows into that direction. And indeed, most of our assets under management, the part on which we are advising, has moved to Article 8. Very nice. We've created one Article 9 fund as well. But when we look into the details of how many in the retail clients in the end were asking for going into those type of funds, the proportion remains quite limited, to be honest, and that's roughly 15% only of our retail clients that have decided to make it a priority in terms of his investment. So, at least in the conversation, but adoption not massive yet. What has worked a bit less well, if I may, is the fact that regulation was supposed to be a disclosure regulation. And it became a sort of label that banks and asset managers have started putting to some extent on a certain number of funds. And that was not the initial intention. And in Article 8 fund, you have really everything. You have really funds that have a bit of attention to the topic, and some that are mostly invested in a very sustainable and quite green asset where you have indeed really effort that are made into that direction. So that issue that created a lot of confusion for investors when they were buying those funds. They didn't know exactly what they were buying. The second issue is that the question is, how do we measure impact? Hence the importance of linking it with indeed other type of taxonomy, and the UT was the first step, but here also lots of unclarities on how really you measure the impact of what you invest in. So I think there's still some work, and indeed for the moment not fully satisfactory way to propose options to clients.
Do you think now that investors are allowed to estimate taxonomy alignment, and by the way, we did a study on how data providers were estimating alignment, and actually there were not many divergences in terms of alignment, there were more divergences in terms of eligibility, interesting enough. Do you think that could boost the use of taxonomy?
I think we need to be a bit careful, because there indeed we can see some greenwashing risk popping up. So that's a question mark for me. I will be cautious.
Good. That was very, very clear, Anne-Sophie. Petra, what do you recommend moving forward? What do you think it's the key changes for improving SFDR, especially from the lenses or the optics of the CEE region?
So how we see it in CEE region, we see this a bit of overwhelming. There are many topics not very clear. Again, as been mentioned already, bit complex. So we would take a few steps back and to focus on the topics which are the most important and critical and people understand. CO2 emissions, probably energy efficiency, one of the most obvious and important. You know, we can quantify, we can measure it. And the more complex topics like, you know, biodiversity probably should come, but maybe we should wait a bit because it's, you know, a bit less understandable. So overall, when you also ask in our pre-discussion on the retail investors, I think they are overwhelmed. They are a bit of lost. So I think the simplification, measurability is very important. You can track, you can understand, and you can also bit of then as an investor know what you are doing. What is also very important is that the big responsibility is put on the investors, which probably should be a bit of done from the other side more on the customers. And put in a bit of more responsibility in terms of the linkage to the greenwashing on issuers of the instruments.
Right. Can I ask you a quick question? When you talk about, obviously, biodiversity, we've seen only one company was reporting on it, so it's clearly more...
Sorry, it wasn't biodiversity, it was pollution.
Oh, pollution, sorry.
Yeah.
So pollution, well, let's talk about the other environmental objectives clearly have been less taken up, both by companies and investors. But this is in terms of, what you were saying was in terms of mandatory reporting by investors, right? So we will still need to have a proper comprehensive ESRS for those investors that do wish, and a taxonomy on biodiversity that wish, right? But leave it voluntary.
Correct.
Is that?
Exactly.
Perfect. I wanted very quickly to say, just to wrap up on the SFDR. From my perspective, one thing that you haven't mentioned, and for me that is being clear, it's been clearly the biggest contribution of SFDR is that whatever we might think about the complexities and fully agreeing about, you know, how it has confused the industry to a certain extent with the Article 8 and Article 9, we cannot deny that it has really increased the percentage of the ESG funds in Europe. It has gone up to 62%. Europe today is mainly sustainable finance, is mainly ESG, and that is thanks to SFDR mainly, and the Sustainable Finance Package. We cannot deny it. And while a few years ago, I remember, when you talk about sustainable finance, was very much centered in some Western, and I would say Northwestern countries. You know, in my own country, I saw how it went from almost 0 to 37% today. So I would argue that with all its flaws, the Sustainable Finance Package has more has more sort of homogenized, you know, the idea of sustainable finance, the reporting, whether it is green or not. It has created the discussion, right? It has moved, or it has put or planted the seed in companies, investors, and banks across Europe, yeah, and it has done more for that sort of a standardization in Europe and movement, you know, help other regions to catch up. Would you agree on that quickly? Mostly? Yes. Okay, so with that, let's very quickly move to the Savings and Investment Union, because let's imagine, you know, let's be very, very positive, yeah? We already had 720 billion invested in, you know, CapEx invested in taxonomy-aligned mitigation investments. We've seen 62% of our market is ESG. Let's imagine that the review of SFDR, ESRS, the taxonomy, you know, is done really well, and becomes extremely effective. Even if that happens, the sustainable finance package would only manage to mobilize a fraction of all the amount that we need to invest in the transition. Because one of the main problems we face in Europe is the lack of integration of our financial markets, the lack of depth, and the problem of not being able to really channel European savings into market, based investments, besides some low yield, investments or funds. So let's start looking about what is the role of the Savings and Investment Union, how it can really contribute to channel the investments that we need for the transition. And let's, park the Sustainable Finance Framework, whose role is to identify those investments that are green, that they are sustainable, that they are for the transition, and allow the end investor to choose them. So let's start with fragmentation. Peter, I think everyone agrees by now, after reading the Draghi report or hear about it, that we don't have one single market. We have 27 singles. So what is it? What does this fragmentation mean in practice for the Central and Eastern Europe region? Give us a snapshot of your thought of the key recommendations to really create a banking and capital markets union.
I mean, when you look at our bank being active in 12 countries, and the fragmentation is super, super high. We are in the whole Central Eastern Europe and Southeastern Europe, and when you go from little countries or small countries, with all due respect, of course, Kosovo, Albania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Serbia, then you go up via Croatia, Czech Republic. It's each and every market is culturally different. It's of course regulatory different, compliance. So it creates a lot of complexity, creates a lot of costs. So overall, you see that the overall group and overall banking operation is losing a bit on the efficiency and losing big part of the capital and money in investing in all these necessary little things which are simply locally important. So from our perspective, on top of it, the good thing is that Europe is now getting united thanks to the orange wave from US. However, still, big part of the Central Eastern Europe is unfortunately not the case. As you see, in some of the countries, the nationalists or national targets and goals are more important than the European Union. So from this perspective, all diversification and fragmentation is very, 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 very big obstacle of good development. And here we believe that the monetary union, capital union, and of course saving union would make a major kick. Because you see that there is so much capital, so much money sitting on the accounts of people, and it's idle. People either buy some properties, and that's it. People are not investing. If we would create this big market, unified with a proper product, we can rechannel and channel the capital into SMEs and transformation of the economies. So we see here major, big advantage or a big reason why to do that. Recommendation, of course, unification of regulation, unification of compliance framework, and building financial literacy, very super important thing, which I believe stays very involved in ING and all the banks, because people need the education and proper right-fitting products to their risk kind of appetite and risk capacity to invest.
Thank you. So when the Commission is looking at simplification, maybe it should also add national regulation, maybe together.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we agree on that one. Andreas, if Europe, had the same investment to deposit ratio than the US, we could channel 8 trillion euros. That will be enough to pay for the twin transition and other priorities, yeah? So how to do that? And how do you see, the potential discussions, the role of the auto-enrollment or long-term savings schemes, how that could work in Europe? The idea also that is flagging around of having European, pan-European financial products. What your thoughts are?
So the Savings and Investment Union, obviously the biggest lever to address those pools, Pietro already mentioned, if you have it on the bank accounts, on the liability side of the bank, there is only so much you can do on the asset side of the bank in terms of tenors and risk profile. So the Savings and Investment Union should encourage to go put some of these savings into pools which can take a higher risk portion and or longer tenors for which the ecosystem already is there. You have infrastructure funds, so there is the staggered finance, it's just to make the pools wider. Already mentioned was to a certain degree fragmentation. Then if you want to have those unified products, if you have the national divergences in MiFID implementation, you cannot sell them easily across our region especially. So that also leads to fragmentation. And lastly, you mentioned also pan-European products. Here, if the framework is right, it's probably harder to regulate products into existence. You probably were alluding to the PEP. So most bankers know PEP from politically exposed person, but I learned through the preparation that it's a savings product, the pan-European personal pension product, which was created out of regulation, but very few have heard about it. Whereas regulation can make a difference when it comes out at the right time. So we discussed a lot about SFDR. Sustainable asset management, for example, in Erst has been around for more than 25 years roughly, but it gave it a framework where you can classify the funds also in a harmonized fashion across the countries. We touched upon the EU Green Bond Standard. There was, of course, the ICMA Green Bond Standard before. The EU Green Bond Standard builds on a lot of the elements, second-party review, and the definition of assets. Here, of course, we're tapping into the EU framework, taxonomy for the definition of the underlying assets, for the second-party review, it has to be somebody who is accredited by ESMA and so on. Then it makes sense, then you have an uptick. I agree, it's limited for the time being to companies who have a high taxonomy-eligible turnover and CapEx, so typically public transport and the like, but it will become broader. That's where then you can build, how shall I say, first the framework, the regulated product probably later.
Unfortunately, we're coming out of time, but I wouldn't want to leave without asking one last question to Piotr, because we've heard, I think it is quite clear the messages that are coming from this panel, right? On one hand, we're saying that some level of simplification of review is necessary for the taxonomy, for ESRS, for SFDR, but at the same time, we want the scope of the regulation to remain the same, just really focus on what is really important, and simplify only what needs to be simplified. At the same time, I think the Savings and Investment Union messages are quite clear too. But what we haven't sorted out, it's what is the view in this region in terms of what's going on in Brussels, in the sense of to what extent do you feel that the ECE region actually has a loud voice in the development of the Sustainable Finance Package and Savings and Investment Union, and in particular, is Poland playing a leading role for the region, yes or no, or what should we tell the Commission and the Parliament in terms of, the needs of the region?
Sure, so very, very, very briefly. Apart from being at the Polish Development Fund, I'm also co-founder and board member of Polsif, and Linda was a great supporter of us, so we are also developing the agenda in Poland. And I think we have the right momentum because the current government and the current kind of state of mind in Poland, I would say, is much more pro-transition. So I think if I were to say what is the major thing that we should have in mind is to make transition finance mainstream. Obviously, taxonomy is amazingly important, but most of our economy in CEE is transition. And I mentioned that what we need to add for all of this to make really, really impact is to add, for example, things. And there are not many things we should follow, for instance, what Hungarians do, apologies to all the Hungarians, but they did introduce a capital relief program for banks for green investment. This is a very good idea. In this part of Europe, we have huge transition risks within portfolios of banks and other institutions. So by adding transition finance, we are reducing the transition risks, but let's have it kind of, addressed also on the capital side or whatever. So very briefly, very shortly. And our voice is not loud enough, but I think it's growing, so that's great.
Thank you so much. I think we need another panel to discuss transition finance in detail, but unfortunately we don't have more time. So please join me in thanking, the panelists and excellent panelists and all their insights. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was a very rich discussion. It's a real pleasure to have actually very different roles in the ecosystem. So you heard a lot about CSRD, SFDR, and all the acronyms. We live in a massive land of acronyms when it comes to sustainable finance. And after a short coffee break that we have for 20 minutes, so we will start with a small delay at 11:15, 11:20. Outside you will find coffee and also some food, so you can get your energy levels back up. The speakers will be around, so please feel free to find them and ask follow-up questions, because that's what the conversation is for. So, coffee, and also you can find already the photos via the QR code. You can find the QR code scattered around the building, so you can already find some nice photos of yourselves. So, thank you very much. Coffee and food.